to another advisory meeting this morning. So connectivity is an interesting thing to measure, and the question is, what does it mean? And so our brochures talk about 38 states and 36,000 some schools, and we tried to dig down a little deeper into this broadband question. If we had an exciting multimedia resource and an institution, a school building, middle school in Austin, Texas, claimed to be Internet2 connected, do they in fact have the end-to-end capability to take advantage of some rich resource? But it seems to me we have some risk of falling into the age-old higher education measurement problem. We're measuring inputs instead of outputs. And so implicit in that is what do you get with Internet2? Do you get measurable reduction in latency? And how many people are measuring that, and for which kinds of applications is that a killer difference? Does the traffic pattern change when your school district, your public library, your museum gets the Internet2 sticker on its website? Is there a new mix of applications or protocols? Can we measure impact on teaching and on learning and other transformational experiences? And in my sense is we have better and better data on the input connectivity side and a growing corpus of information down here, but it's, I think, still vastly too anecdotal. And I've been struggling to try to connect the inputs with the outputs. And some of the questions that we've been asking in Texas. So we've been on SegP for 3 years. How much traffic do we send to the Internet2 Avenue backbone? And what are the determinants of those traffic patterns? What are the key sites, apps, and protocols? Is there more to this than low latency? Does the pattern of SegP traffic look different from the pattern of commodity traffic? Since many of our institutions are connected to the NLR Layer 3 PacketNet, is PacketNet changing the SegP traffic distribution, and how will the new Avalene replacement network affect all of this? And then implicit in a lot of this is, are we getting our money's worth? But with 1.8 billion hitting the Internet2 revenue side from the SegP program, that's a lot of money. Is there $1.8 billion worth of measurable SegP output that we can find? Then I have to confess, and Carol knows this well, some of these questions are mediated by the peculiarities of Texas. And so let me just spend a minute on that. There is no unified K-12 network in Texas. We have 1,300 plus independent school districts. Emphasis on independent. We have no unified higher education network. There are 6 separate public systems of higher education in Texas, each with their own board of regents. There are also some public universities that aren't in any of those systems. And the 60 community colleges have no system whatsoever. So it wasn't a no-brainer, in short, for us to do SegP, but the question is, who the heck would do it? And if you came up with the money, what router would you reconfigure to make SegP happen? We spent over a year in negotiating with universities in Texas and with Internet2 to figure out how to make a SegP work. And what we came up with, since there was no central agency that wanted to eat the $94,000 charge, we said, let's do this on a charge-out basis. And higher education institutions would pay X, and school districts, libraries would pay 0.25X. And then however many of them we had in any 1 year, we do the arithmetic. And after 3 years, even when the a state as large as Texas and a total fee of only $94,000 to fund, we've had extremely modest take-ups, as you can see here. Only 24 colleges and universities, only about 1% of the 1,300 school districts in the state. So coming to these meetings is always something of disappointment to us, because it seems as if whatever payoffs your teachers and students and museum attendees are getting, we're somehow missing the boat. And I'm not even sure we know where the dock is. So how could we be adding value here? And what could we do to convince more of the higher ed institutions that it's worth only $27.50 a year? I mean, that's a well-configured Macintosh with a little software, right? And $650 for ISDs. So, you know, what are we missing? And then presumably they come back and say, well, surely we can come up with that one-time money, but what else would we have to commit to this to have success? Are you really telling me that you do a router reconfiguration and magic happens in my curriculum? And of course, we know better than that. And you might even say, well, what if we were wildly successful? We're a very big state. Is the Internet2 backbone even adequate to manage if we did all the right kind of marketing and support? So we've had a look at the published data on the Abilene site over the last year to try to understand, okay, how much traffic is actually transiting the Abilene backbone? This may be a little hard to read, so let me tell you what we have here. There are, on the order, at least last year, there are 36 connectors to Abilene. So the Pacific Northwest Gigapop in Seattle would be one, and Max in the DC area. And for a conference that we hosted in the Southeast, we looked at 14 or so connectors in the region from Delaware down to Texas. So the first one of them is Florida A&M in Tallahassee. They have an OC3 connection. The daily peak for the year was 7 megabits. The weekly peak was 5, the monthly peak was 10, and the yearly peak was 4. So we said, what's the max of the peaks? And said they used over the last year 6% of their OC3 connection. And then the next one is Lonnie, the new network in Louisiana, OC3, and they at peak used 44%, max 50%. The biggest connector in the Southeast is Sox in Atlanta. They have a 10 gigabit connection. The peak for the year was 950 megabits, so you know, barely 10%. So across the whole region, we were paying for 16 gigabits of gateway traffic to the backbone. And if you sum the peaks, assume that every region had its peak at exactly the same time, you can see that the yearly peak measured over a day was 2.6 gigabytes, etc. So that the whole server region used about 17% of the gateway bandwidth it's paying for, measured at the peak. And then, if you say, well, okay, we were paying not only SAP fees, but participation fees for on the order of 100 universities that are in the Southeast region, plus the connection fees for the 14 connectors. I don't happen to have that number in my head, but if you do the arithmetic, it turns out that we were paying $26.39 per megabit at the pump, as it were. I mean, that's what we were paying for the capacity we were buying. But if you actually look at the capacity we were using, we were paying on the order of $150, $160 a megabit for the peak traffic that we were sending on the Abilene backbone. That's mighty expensive capacity compared to what you can get the commodity internet for in the aggregate in most metropolitan areas. So I have to say, these data were rather startling to us when we looked at them because we had assumed that the Internet2 backbone was closer to the red line more of the time. And in fact, there's there's been quite a lot of headroom available. Then if you generalize that across the whole country, 36 connectors, the community buying 65 gigabits at peak using 9.5, so about 15% of the gateway capacity. I mean, obviously, if there's a 10 gigabit backbone, you can't sell and use 65 gigabits, but you get the idea. So then we try to disaggregate the study. So what's the traffic look like to and from Abilene in a typical university? What does it look like on a SEC-P? And what are the applications and protocols that really take good advantage of the unique and quite costly infrastructure that we've created here? So we looked at one of the independent school districts in Texas last year. Looked at it, I think, for 3 days, and looked at the traffic inbound and outbound. And we were stunned to observe that 50% of the traffic was to and from Microsoft. So then we recall that during the panic 3 years ago, when Microsoft announced the patch to Windows XP, SP2, many of us were concerned that it would swamp our commodity internet gateways. And the clever folks at the Pacific Northwest Gigapop said, I think we have a solution to this problem. Microsoft connects to our POP. If we can get them to agree and get Internet2 to agree to send the patches over Abilene, many of us have lots of headroom on Abilene. A lot of us didn't thought that was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Nobody knew that they ever turned that off. And what we also didn't know is that when you accept traffic from Microsoft, you get not only the patches, you also get Microsoft Passport, you get Hotmail, you get MSN.net, you get Microsoft.com, you get the whole shooting match. Interesting, right? But not at all what we've been talking about today, right? This has nothing much to do with innovation and multimedia teaching and learning and so forth. So once you flush the Microsoft traffic out of this independent school district, there wasn't much of anything left. We then looked at UT Austin for a day in February. I mean, the swallow doesn't make a summer, but we found 20% of UT Austin's Abilene traffic was to and from Microsoft. And the startling thing to us was we're sending as much traffic to Microsoft as we're receiving. You know that? So a lot of machines at UT are configured to download and install automatically whatever patch Microsoft may be available. Fair enough. That's a fair amount of download traffic. What is it we're sending back to the mothership? That's generating an equal amount of traffic back to Microsoft. Is this worrisome? I mean, we're dying to know. Then on that particular day, 9% of the packets on Abilene came from one open source software archive in Oregon State. Some of you may well be familiar with this archive. I'm blanking on the name of it, but it's a very important resource in the area. 8% came from NASA, 4% from a news server, National Library of Medicine, and so forth. Now, it's not altogether obvious that much of that traffic takes good advantage of Abilene, per se. Usenet News, if it comes in 100 milliseconds from Syracuse or 2.5 minutes, not sure it makes any difference at all. So one of our concerns, it used to be the case that the cost per megabit, at least in the aggregate, was cheaper on Abilene than our commodity internet provider. So we were thrilled whenever we could divert traffic from commodity to Abilene. For many of us, that's flipped. And it's flipped in two important ways. Not only the cost per megabit on the contract, but the fact that with Abilene, you have to buy at the max no matter how much you use, whereas many of us are negotiating commodity contracts so that you commit to some level and you can burst above that. And in some of our contracts, you can burst 5% above that at no cost. And then if you're above 5%, you pay for what you use. So it is just not obvious why we would want Usenet news traffic to be coming over Abilene or mirroring an open source archive over Abilene if the bits are cheaper on the commodity internet. So it appears that there's less traffic on the Abilene backbone than many of us had suspected in the aggregate. It appears from lots of our anecdotal conversations that SegB doesn't account for very much of the Abilene backbone traffic. There's plenty of headroom on I2 most times, which I think matches the anecdotal notion that it's dynamite for end-to-end video conferencing and so forth. It may or may not be cost-effective for video conferencing, but if the costs are fixed, then we ought to be using the resource that we're paying for. It's not at all obvious that the $1.8 million charge for SegB is a reasonable one, based on any measure we can come up with on use of Internet2 resources. And as I mentioned, comparative costs are changing. Plus, we have the whole NLR piece in here, that for some 100+ universities that are members of both NLR and Internet2, the NLR-connected universities have access as a so-called birthright to a 10 gigabit layer 3 service. So there is therefore a propensity among those institutions to minimize the cost that they're paying to Abilene, at least during the initial 5-year commitment to NLR. So not only the cost functions changing here, but the fact that Internet2 is migrating to NewNet and Internet2 and PacketNet are coexisting in the same space is leading to a lot of very interesting sort of first principles questions to be asked that haven't been asked for a very long time, if ever. And then one thing we've been struggling with is we convince or some school district or library or community college says we want to do Internet2, we can certainly come up with that fairly modest contribution to the $94,000 state SegB fee, and we've got trainers at the ready and so forth. But what will be the impact on our network infrastructure? Are we ready for it? What do we have to have in place? And we don't yet have any kind of behavioral or mathematical models that would predict, when you plug your school district, library, or college into Internet2, what can you reasonably predict over what time period will happen to the traffic flows in and out of your network? So this is not exactly rocket science. Many of us, our institutions, our regional networks, do have routers that can capture all kinds of net flows. And if we put bright people on this problem, I think we could learn a whole lot more about how all this stuff works than we know today. But it's altogether more mysterious after many, many years of doing this than seems reasonable to us. In part, there was the sense that, well, we're committed to doing this and we get this much capacity, and as long as we don't run out of headroom, the problem is inducing more demand. We haven't been terribly successful at inducing more demand, and that leads us to ask, how do we year after year justify these costs? So we would be very interested in your help. To the extent that the Texas school kids are falling behind 37 other SegB states because we're doing something wrong, and we'd like to get it right. To the extent that all of us need to understand better how these relationship between a national high-speed backbone and indeed international high-speed backbones, regional backbones, and then the last mile. Ultimately, a lot of this stuff is about end-to-end performance. And it's been a tough thing to get a handle on. So I thank you for your time, and Carol and I will be very, very interested in your feedback on this.
Comments?
Yes, please.
Meet us at 7:30 at Bayou 3. We'll talk about this particular topic for quite some time. We've kind of been on the opposite side of it. We're at the very beginning of deploying Internet2 K20. And we're grappling with the same kind of things I noticed University of Louisville was up there on your screen in terms of traffic flow. And so we've got one school district that has been the model, if you will, our poster child for Internet2. And what has taken off in that particular environment has certainly been video conferencing, interactive video conferencing. From the first day they saw it, they started using it almost on a weekly basis. Teachers became engaged. Now they're trying to generate content. They were the VJs on the Mega Conference Junior thing. Is that going to be the model for the entire state? Probably not. We're certainly grappling with the very basic questions that you put on the screen today. So come join us. We'll commiserate on this.
Where is that?
It was local hotel bar.
Yeah.
They have a pretty good week here, so I'll treat you personally.
For those who are interested in continuing this conversation, which I think it's a sort of an auspicious moment to be having the conversation in the context of the merger, and also I also want to let the folks from the state heads sort of talk to us for a bit too. But this relationship between our institutions, the state networks, the regional optical networks, and the national backbone is, I think, an important one, and certainly the data suggests a number of things that when Dan first told me about this, I was some of the data was pretty surprising, particularly. I mean, the Microsoft stuff we knew from the Gigapop, and one of the, oddly for us, one of the great benefits that we provide our schools in Washington are our peering and exchange relationships. And it's not something that we ever really talk about directly. We talk about more of these other things, but in the context of the merger, I think and we may even want to opine, as the Quilt has and others about the merger. The safety fees go directly to the Abilene budget, just so we're clear about that. That's where the funding goes. So, Dana, thank you. This is great. We'll make this, as with all the presentations, available on the K20 side, and would love to continue to follow up with you on this. It struck me too. I don't know how many of you are involved in the Health Nets work, the pilot project at the FCC, the RFP that went out. But this conversation came up once again in that context, because you're talking to these rural telehealth networks and saying, well, you can connect to the Abilene backbone, and they're saying, well, why? Because what we do is we have our referral patterns, and we know what our traffic patterns are, and being connected to a national backbone is it's a nice idea. Maybe we want some stuff from the National Institutes of Health, but we could probably do that with modern internet. And so it's been sort of a revealing conversation, and particularly in its applicability to the whole SIGP program. So with that, I'd asked George Lascaris and John Killebrew if they'd come and talk to us a little bit about the state networks and what they're up to and where their work and our work might align, and maybe even respond to some of what Dan had to say.